Those wings belong in a museum, not on your chest. The F-22 pilot's voice dripped with contempt as he stared at the elderly man's faded aviator wings in the base commissary. "What did you fly, Grandpa?" "A Wright Brothers special." The elderly man, Walter Ghost Harrison, stood quietly in the checkout line at the Nellis Air Force Base commissary, holding a small basket with bread, milk, and a can of soup. At 84 years old, he moved with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned that rushing was a young man's luxury. His thin white hair was combed neatly under an old Vietnam veteran cap, and on his faded blue windbreaker, he wore a set of pilot wings that had seen better days. The gold long since tarnished to a dull bronze, the metal worn smooth by decades of proud wear. Captain Tyler Viper Richards, all of 28 years old and fresh off his latest red flag exercise, stood behind him in his flight suit, his modern wings gleaming like mirrors. He was flanked by two other F-22 Raptor pilots from the 94th Fighter Squadron, Lieutenant Marcus Razor Williams and Captain Amanda Valkyrie Foster. They were the Air Force's elite, flying the most advanced fighter aircraft ever built, and they wore their arrogance like afterburner exhaust. "Seriously, those wings have to be from what, Korea?" Richards continued, his voice loud enough to draw attention from other shoppers. "You can barely see the shield anymore. They let anyone wear those back in the day, didn't they? Probably gave them out for flying cargo planes." Walter's weathered hands gripped the shopping basket a little tighter, but he didn't turn around. His pale gray eyes, which had once tracked MiG fighters through monsoon clouds over North Vietnam, remained fixed on the cashier ahead. The young airman at the register, Airman First Class Cooper, looked uncomfortable at the mounting tension. "Leave him alone, Richards," Foster said, though her tone suggested she was more amused than concerned. "He's probably some crew chief who bought those at a surplus store." "Crew chief?" Williams laughed. "More like museum volunteer. Look at him shake. Probably can't even drive a car straight anymore, let alone fly anything." Indeed, Walter's hands did have a slight tremor, not from age or fear, but from the nerve damage sustained when his F-4 Phantom took a SAM missile over Hanoi in 1972. He'd held the stick steady for 40 more minutes with a basketball-sized hole in his fuselage, half his hydraulics gone and his backseater unconscious, managing to limp back to Thailand rather than ejecting over hostile territory. "You know what your problem is?" Richards said, moving closer to the old man. "You old-timers always want to relive your glory days, walking around with your ancient medals and wings like they mean something today. This is 2025, Pops. We fly computers with wings now, fifth-generation fighters that would blow your mind." Walter finally turned slightly, just enough to look at the young captain. His voice, when he spoke, was soft and raspy from years of cockpit oxygen and radio calls. "F-4 Phantom, that's what I flew," Richard snorted. "A Phantom? That flying brick? Jesus, that's not even a real fighter. It's a missile truck with engines. No gun, terrible visibility, handled like a school bus. We studied those things as examples of how not to design a fighter." "It had its moments," Walter said quietly, turning back to face forward. "Moments?" Williams jumped in. "The Phantom's kill ratio in Vietnam was pathetic. What was it, 2-to-1 on a good day? My Raptor could take down an entire squadron of those things without breaking a sweat." The commissary had grown quieter. Other shoppers, many of them military families, were beginning to pay attention to the conversation. An older woman in the next line, wearing a spouse ID badge, shook her head disapprovingly at the young pilots. Richards wasn't done. "How many hours you have, Grandpa?" "Couple thousand. I've got 1,500 in the Raptor alone, and each one of those hours is worth 10 in your generation's junk. We pull 9 Gs without breaking a sweat, track 30 targets simultaneously, and engage from beyond visual range. You probably had to get close enough to see the color of their eyes." "Close enough to see their faces," Walter corrected softly. "When they ejected, when they burned," something in his tone made Foster shift uncomfortably. "Richards, maybe we should—" No, I want to hear this. Richards cut her off. How many combat missions you fly, old man? 20? 30? Some milk runs over South Vietnam? Walter was quiet for a moment, his mind drifting back to the mission board at Ubon Royal Thai Air Base, his name appearing again and again, sometimes twice a day. 312, he said finally. Over North Vietnam. 168 of those were over Hanoi and Haiphong. Williams laughed disbelievingly. 300. Right. Nobody flew that many combat missions. Tour limit was 100. I extended, Walter said simply. 3 times. The cashier had stopped scanning items, frozen by the tension. Richards leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. And how many of those antique MiGs did you shoot down with your flying brick? 1? Maybe got lucky twice? Walter's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He could still see them. The silver MiG-17s, the camouflaged MiG-21s, darting through the clouds like lethal dragonflies. He could still feel the stick in his hand, the pressure suit squeezing his legs as he pulled lead on a target, the satisfying shudder as a sidewinder left the rail. A few, was all he said. A few, Richards repeated mockingly. He pulled out his phone. You know what? I'm curious. What's your name, Grandpa? Let's look up this amazing combat record of yours. Walter hesitated, then spoke quietly. Harrison. Walter Harrison Richards typed quickly, clearly expecting to find nothing. Williams and Foster crowded around to look at his screen. Richards' thumbs moved confidently across the phone, pulling up military databases that young officers had access to. Walter Harrison, Air Force, Vietnam, he muttered as he searched. Then his fingers stopped. The blood drained from his face. What the? Foster grabbed the phone, her eyes widening as she read. Williams leaned over her shoulder, his cocky grin evaporating like morning mist. The phone screen showed a distinguished flying cross citation page. Not just one, but 15 of them. Then the silver stars. 5. And at the top, the light blue ribbon with white stars that made Richard's hands begin to shake. Medal of Honor, Foster whispered. Colonel Walter Ghost Harrison. For actions on December 18, 1972, during Operation Linebacker 2. Despite severe damage to his aircraft from surface-to-air missiles, Colonel Harrison engaged and destroyed 4 MiG-21s while protecting a damaged B-52 with no defensive capability. Her voice cracked. He then escorted the bomber for 200 miles to safety, while flying an aircraft that engineers later said shouldn't have been able to remain airborne. Richard's phone showed more. The official tally? 21 confirmed air-to-air victories. The 3rd highest scoring American ace of the Vietnam War. The only pilot to achieve ace status in a single day during the Christmas bombings. Williams' voice was barely audible. You're Ghost Harrison. You wrote Phantom Tactics. It's required reading at fighter weapons school. We still use your energy management techniques. The high-low yo-yo variant you developed is called the Ghost Roll. Walter said nothing, his eyes still fixed ahead as the cashier, who had been listening with rapt attention, slowly began scanning his items again with trembling hands. Richard scrolled further, his face growing paler. It says here you flew F-15 after Vietnam. You were in the first Gulf War. At age 59? Shot down 2 Iraqi MiG-29s. How is that even possible? They recalled some of us old Phantom drivers, Walter said quietly. Experience mattered back then. Foster found another article. You trained the first F-22 pilots. You're the reason we have the Raptor program. You were the senior test pilot. It says you pulled 12 Gs in an early prototype, trying to find its limits. The commissary was dead silent now. Other shoppers had stopped pretending to shop. Even the background muzak seemed to have faded away. Richard's hands were visibly shaking now as he found one more entry. Last flight, 2010, age 73, F-16 aggressor pilot at Red Flag. You shot down 6 F-15Es in one exercise. They were predictable, Walter said softly. Relied too much on their technology. not enough on their instincts. The young F-22 pilots stood frozen. Their earlier arrogance evaporated completely. They were looking at not just a legend, but the man who had literally written the book on modern air combat. The man whose tactics they studied, whose innovations they used every day without even knowing it. It was Foster who moved first. Captain Amanda Valkyrie Foster, who had graduated top of her class at the Air Force Academy, who had never saluted anyone with more genuine respect, snapped to attention right there in the commissary checkout line. "Sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Colonel Harrison, we are so sorry." Williams immediately followed, his body rigid at attention. Richard stood frozen for another moment, his phone still in his hand showing a photograph of a young Walter Harrison standing next to his battle-damaged F-4 Phantom, its fuselage riddled with over 500 holes from a SAM proximity burst, the aircraft that he had somehow kept flying to save his backseater's life. "Colonel Harrison," Richard said, his voice cracking. "Sir, there's no excuse for what I said, for how I acted." Walter turned fully now, looking at the three young pilots. His gray eyes held no anger, only a deep, weary sadness. "You're right about one thing, Captain. The F-22 is superior to the Phantom in every measurable way. Speed, maneuverability, sensors, weapons. It's a masterpiece of engineering." He paused, his weathered hand unconsciously moving to touch the worn wings on his chest. "But a fighter plane is just aluminum and circuits, son. It's the pilot that makes it a weapon. And the pilot's greatest assets aren't his plane's computers or missiles. They're humility and respect. Humility to know you always have more to learn. Respect for those who came before you, because every advantage you have today was paid for in someone else's blood." The cashier had finished scanning Walter's items. "That'll be $12.47, Colonel," she said softly, tears visible in her eyes. She was old enough to remember her father talking about the Christmas bombings, about the lone Phantom that had saved Uncle Jerry's B-52. Before Walter could reach for his wallet, Richard stepped forward. "Please, sir. Let me. It's the very least I can do." Walter looked at him for a long moment, then nodded slightly. As Richards paid, Williams quickly gathered Walter's bags. "Sir, can we help you to your car?" "I walked," Walter said. "I live just off base. The walk is good for me." "Then we'll walk with you, sir," Foster said immediately, "if you'll allow us." Walter studied the three young pilots. They looked different now, the cockiness replaced by something else, perhaps the beginning of wisdom. "All right," he said finally. As they walked out of the commissary, Richards carrying Walter's groceries, other shoppers began to applaud. It started slowly, with the older woman in the next line, then spread throughout the store. Veterans, spouses, active duty personnel, all standing and clapping for the old pilot with the tarnished wings. Outside in the bright Nevada sun, as they walked slowly toward the base housing area, Williams couldn't help but ask, "Colonel, is it true what they say about December 18th? That you could have ejected when the SAM hit, but you stayed because your backseater was unconscious?" Walter was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. Captain Steve Rabbit Thompson, 23 years old. His wife was pregnant with their first child. He paused. "A daughter. She's a brigadier general now, commands the 355th Wing at Davis-Monthan." "Sir," Richard said hesitantly, Would you consider coming to talk to our squadron? The young pilots, they should hear your stories. Learn from you." Walter smiled slightly, the first real smile they'd seen from him. "You know, when I was your age, flying out of Ubon, we had an old colonel visit us, flew P-51s in World War II. We thought he was a relic, talking about propeller planes and dogfights. We were wrong. He taught us things that saved lives, including mine." He stopped walking and turned to face them fully. "Next Tuesday, 0700, Squadron Briefing Room. Bring every pilot you have. And Captain Richards?" "Yes, sir. Bring a notebook. The real lessons aren't in the manual." As they reached Walter's small house, a modest one-story home with an American flag flying from a pole in the front yard. Foster noticed something that made her breath catch. In the driveway sat a meticulously maintained 1972 Ford Mustang, its license plate reading GHSTPHM. "Your car, sir?" "Bought it when I came back," Walter said. "Same year as my last flight in the Phantom. Both of us are still running, against all odds." The 3 F-22 pilots helped Walter inside with his groceries. On the living room wall they saw it. Not a shrine to his glory days, but a single, simple display. A faded photograph of 12 young pilots standing in front of a line of F-4 Phantoms. Below it, a small plaque. "Wolfpack Squadron, 1972. 4 of us came home." Richard's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Sir, the 8 who didn't make it?" "I remember everyone," Walter said quietly. "Their wives, their children, their dreams. That's why I extended 3 times. Someone had to keep flying for them." As the young pilots prepared to leave, Walter called out, "Captain Richards." "Sir?" "That F-22 of yours. It's a magnificent aircraft, the best fighter ever built. But remember, it's not the plane that makes the pilot, it's the pilot that honors the plane. Every time you strap in, you carry the legacy of every pilot who came before you. Don't forget that." Richard swallowed hard. "I won't, sir." Never again. That Tuesday, the briefing room at Nellis was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread, and pilots from every squadron on base had come. Walter Harrison, wearing his old flight suit that still fit remarkably well, talked for 3 hours. Not about his victories, but about his losses. About the friends who didn't come home. About the mistakes that almost killed him and the lessons written in fire and blood. He taught them things no simulator could. How to feel the aircraft's pain when it's wounded. How to think 3 moves ahead when death is 1 move away. How to be both warrior and human in the lonely cockpit where split seconds determine who lives and who becomes a memory. At the end, as the room full of America's finest fighter pilots stood and applauded, Walter pointed to his worn wings. "These don't belong in a museum," he said, his voice carrying clearly. "They belong right here, over my heart, where they remind me every day of the price of freedom and the honor of serving, just like yours do." 6 months later, Captain Tyler Richards graduated from the Air Force Weapons School at the top of his class. In his graduation speech, he said, "The most important lesson I learned wasn't in any manual or simulator. It was in a base commissary, from a hero I was too arrogant to recognize. He taught me that our greatest strength isn't our technology, it's our humility, our respect for history, and our duty to honor those who showed us the way." Walter Harrison was in attendance, sitting in the front row, wearing the same faded wings. This time, everyone knew exactly what they meant.